Hello, everyone. My name is Dinker Bhardwaj. I'm head of data policy within the smart energy team at BEIS. Thanks, Peter, for inviting me to speak here in your seminar. So Peter's asked me to sort of give a policy perspective on what we mean by digitalizing our energy system. And I'm hoping to sort of explain that to you in my 10-15 minutes today. So just taking us back to the question that Peter asked me, was he wanted an update on what government specific developments were on energy system data and digitalization, and also have a think about what role digitalization might play in facilitating market developments. And I guess I have interpreted market developments as our drive towards net zero, because that definitely is the defining challenge of our times, and the energy system has a really central and crucial role to play in enabling that. So with that in mind, today I want to talk you through a few things. Really spend a little bit of time explaining why digitalization of the energy system is important, why bother in the first place, and try and demystify the concept a little bit. So what do we mean by a digitalized energy system? What does it really mean to us? Also, I want to do a bit of landscaping to tell you of the variety of different things that are happening in the area of digitalization, and then leave you with some discussion on the next steps that government, so my team specifically, and also talk a little bit about what regulator and Innovate UK are also doing, because a key point I want to make at the end is that this is truly a collaborative effort. So I will give a little mention to what is happening in those organizations. But you will hear from Alex Walmsley right after my presentation, and he will go into a lot more detail about what Ofgem are doing specifically, which might be of more interest to the membership here. And then hopefully you'll have some feedback or questions for me, which I'll be very happy to answer. So with that said, why is digitalization of the energy system so important? So clearly, we in the smart energy team at BEIS believe that the future system, the energy system, would be one that is characterized by deep integration between power, heat, transport, buildings, and all those relevant sectors. And clearly, a lot of the technologies that are connecting onto the grid now are happening at the lower voltages or behind the meter, so-called grid edge of our national energy system. So clearly, this is the characteristic that our future system would have. And whichever way you look at it, whether it's generation, whether it's transmission and distribution, system balancing, or consumer outcomes, all the different technologies and business models that are developing really have data at the heart of it. So clearly, data is quite central to the developing energy system. And you really can't make sense of all these large quantities of data and information that is being generated without adequate digitalization, without having the tools and the techniques to make sense of that information. So really, if we believe that the future energy system is one that is going to be increasingly decentralized, characterized by large quantities of small scale assets, domestic scale assets, then really we cannot avoid discussing data and digitalization in this context. So hopefully I'm preaching to the converted here, but this is why it is quite essential to be thinking about this topic, and which is probably why Peter chose this as a topic for today's seminar. But often I'm asked this question, what do we really mean by digitalization? Because it can mean different things to different people. So I have picked up this definition from somewhere. I'm sorry I can't attribute it to somebody, but I really like it. And I think that is essential to make that distinction. So what it really says here is that converting analog data into digital, that process alone is just one part of the story. So that's just making the raw material ready for processing. So you've got a process to convert physical data into physical formats into digital formats. But then how do you make use of them? How do you leverage value out of them? And that activity of leveraging value out of this digital information is what I mean by digitalization. So that can be business models, that can be business processes, that can be consumer offers, marketplaces, all those kinds of things are what contribute to or what constitute digitalization. Now, but what does digitalization really mean in our context of modernizing energy data? So for me, I have chosen these four descriptors. I believe a truly digitalized energy system is one where presumption of openness of data is the industry default, that we're all defaulting towards making more and more information available and open to people who might need it. Obviously, we can't do this without considerations to privacy, to cybersecurity, to commercial interests, and all the rest of it. And we recognize that. And that is why we believe that the open data triage process that has been developed as part of the guidance is something that industry players can use to think about how can they make more and more data open and available to people who might need it for system benefit. The other characteristic of digitalization is one where data is adequate, standardized, and interoperable. And this is a lot about, are we actually digitizing it in the right way? Is it in the right standards? And I think one sort of recent news story really brings it to life, because if you followed that, there was a recent event where roughly 16,000 COVID cases were underreported, and the real reason why that happened was that someone decided to save a spreadsheet in an old format, a .xls format, instead of a .xlx format. And just by doing that simple, innocent mistake, 16,000 odd cases were underreported, and obviously they were not contact traced, and all those things, simple errors can really add up. And while in this case, maybe the impact isn't as adverse or as considerable as it could have been, but really there is no end to it, right? If we do it for critical national infrastructure, then the consequences can be grave. So we really need to make sure that we understand that. And then linked to that, do we have the required infrastructure, processes, technologies, skills to make sense of that new digital information? And finally, do we have the right policy frameworks to give people the confidence to then deal with this new wealth of information that we have? What about data sharing agreements? What about liability waivers? What about incentives to do the right thing where it concerns monopoly networks? So all those kinds of things need to be in place to really, truly, effectively digitalize the energy system. So but feel free to challenge these assumptions, feel free to challenge these descriptors, but this is what I believe we are working with in policy terms. And I'll make this clear in the next slide, where if you see, the four descriptors that I described are actually the ultimate outcomes that we care about. So if you see at the end, we've got these four ultimate outcomes, which are exactly the same descriptors as I described on the previous slide. So if this is what we care about, then how do we get there? Obviously, these are far out in the horizon. We may not truly digitalize our energy system ever. And surely we won't do it in the next 2 or 3 years. But we need some sort of focal points to guide our efforts. So we need some short-term intermediate outcomes as well. And these are what I've tried to describe here. So while the presumption of openness is the industry default, and that's what we want to get to, can we not try and get an agreement on the data and digitalization outputs that are expected from networks maybe sooner than that? Can we not have a commonly agreed data triage process that is well established in the energy industry? And equally, can we not clarify all currently perceived legal regulatory barriers to improve data sharing? Let's at least clarify what we know, where we see perceived barriers. And if we do these things in a time-bound manner, I have optimistically put them here in the second half of 2022 and early 2023, only because it sort of aligns with the price control of the energy networks. But really, if this is not unachievable, if we can really nail down these intermediate outcomes, I believe that we are well on our way to achieve those final desired outcomes that we care about. So that's how I sort of see this. But now moving ourselves to, okay, what's really happening against these outcomes? So this all started with the Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan, which hopefully some of you have heard of, uh, in which we commissioned the Energy Data Task Force. And the Energy Data Task Force was a key piece of work because it really created the momentum that is required and really brought the industry stakeholders together behind this mission. But that report was published in June of 2019. So we've already had that report. The question obviously is what has happened since? And the short answer is a lot. The report has spawned a series of initiatives across government, Ofgem, and indeed industry. And I think the industry should be recognized for all the efforts they are making. So if you see, I've just picked out a few, there may be others, but these are the different activities that I feel have happened as a direct consequence of the task force report. And you'll see, I've put them in green and as timelines only because these are not single activities, they're collections of activities and they'll happen over time. So on the top, you see all the networks have published their digitalization strategies, the first iterations, which are really good efforts. And Ofgem is now minded to provide more guidance on how they can be iterated over time. Ofgem has also reviewed all of them and responded through an open letter, which is a very good letter if you haven't read it. So I think these sort of activities are providing a lot of strategic overview of data and digitalization as a concept. But equally, there's lots of stuff happening in terms of, tangible delivery infrastructure. So there's the Modernizing Energy Data Access project. There's lots more detail available on that, so please feel free to ask about that. But this is something that Innovate UK have funded. And this has directly followed on from the EDTF, and both BEIS and Ofgem are deeply involved in the design and delivery of these innovation competitions. And then ENA, the Energy Network Association, is investing in developing a national energy system map, which, a sample was already made available for public viewing, but now I believe they're in the process of finding a delivery partner to deliver a minimum viable product, which users can test and see if it is actually delivering what we want. So just to give you an example of all the different sorts of activities that have spawned from the task force report. But we are mindful that Ofgem, BEIS, and Innovate UK are not the only three organizations looking at this, and Modernizing Energy Data is not the only program that's happening. There is a whole wealth of activity that's going on. And I've just picked a different color to make that distinction. But you can see that there's lots of government-led digitalization strategies. There's obviously the National Digital Twin program coming out of the Centre for Digital Build Britain. So clearly, there's lots of strategic oversight, drive, momentum towards this agenda. And then there's other industry-led initiatives which are trying to improve the availability of data, improve the standards, improve the usability of the data that they own. So, and finally, Ofgem has a whole forward work plan of really specific license conditions, output expectations that they want to put on the regulated industry. I won't get into that because Alex will, but this is just to tell you that this is all fitting quite neatly within the ultimate outcomes that we have defined. So we're really trying to get to that stage. And it's not the only responsibility of my team to do that. And it's not something that Ofgem can do on its own. But this is something that if we collaborate on and have the strategic end goals in sight, then I believe we can make significant progress. And the final thing I want to say on this slide is that all these different activities, to my mind, organically categorize themselves into sort of three headline categories, which to me are leadership, building blocks, and framework. But I would definitely welcome your thoughts on this and your thoughts on what I've just described in terms of the different activities here. And a disclaimer, this is definitely not a comprehensive list. I know that for a fact. So obviously there's lots of work happening, which I have missed. But all I'm trying to say here is that there is a logic to how these different things are happening, and it is incumbent on the government to make sure that we make sense of it and we coordinate this in the best possible way. So now, what do we mean by leadership, building blocks, and frameworks? I believe leadership is about communicating progress becoming a focal point, setting a vision, setting out a challenge for all stakeholders, and really giving industry the confidence that this is what government really means and is willing to support movement towards. So setting that out quite clearly, making this case quite clearly, saying that this is important, I believe is what I mean by leadership. And obviously, we also need to provide that coordination, which I've just described. I think that is crucial because there is a lot of really good activity already happening. So we need to make sure that there is proper coordination with that strategic oversight on all of that. So that's what I mean by leadership. On building blocks, I'm thinking more about actual physical delivery of either platforms or services or catalogs, things like that, which make it easier for data to be abundant, available, usable, shareable, all those kinds of things. So the actual delivery in physical digital assets is what I mean by building blocks. And then frameworks is about setting the rules and regulations that allow people to operate in the best possible way with confidence, with security around their investments, having viable business models so that they can make progress confidently. So I believe that if we have to truly digitalize the energy system, so remember the outcomes, remember the intermediate outcomes, if we have to really get to those outcomes, we need to be making effort across these three pillars of strategy. And that's what I feel we are doing. And if you remember, there are enough activity under each of these three pillars. So we can't have one which is about like lots of stuff happening in one pillar, but another pillar, nothing really happening. So it's important that we do the right amount of investment and effort across these three. And I believe we are doing that. The link at the bottom of this slide is a gov.uk page, which sort of describes what we've done so far, what's coming, and makes it clear and official that there is follow-on work happening on from the Energy Data Task Force. And then I won't spend too much time on these two slides because this is more for Ofgem to say. And as I said, Alex will do a much better job on this than I ever can. But this is just to show that this is not just, strategic talk and no action. Ofgem are actually investing a lot of effort in creating the right regulations. And this is just a snapshot of the things that are either happening or will happen soon. But all these different licenses as a package will make clear what the regulatory expectations are around energy data and its modernization. And then finally, I wanted to leave you with this slide. This is a truly collaborative program, and the government, which is BEIS, Ofgem, and Innovate UK, have really worked together on all of this. And this is a good way of sort of describing the landscape. So you see all the boxes in red are innovation-funded activity that is in one way or another either related to what we're doing or has come out of exactly what we are doing. So all these things with modernizing energy data in front of them are competitions in the range of 2 million thereabouts, which have come out of our analysis of what we need to do urgently to modernize energy data, and that these are undergoing, and we have received some really encouraging early feedback on them. And all the boxes in blue are either regulatory or legislative activity that's going on. And I think I've described a lot of that to you anyway, but please do ask questions if you have any. And so I guess this is just to show you that digitalizing the energy system is not a single project. It is something that has to happen across policy, innovation, and regulation, and we have the right partners to do that. It is something that the public sector alone cannot deliver, so the private sector needs to be involved. And the early signs that the industry are showing in terms of getting behind the agenda and delivering on some of those recommendations are really promising. And I think they should be recognized and lauded for that. But I still believe that there is a lot of scope for improving the coordination around all of this. And I hope that the work that I'm doing with my partners is one that will be able to provide that coordination. So I want to leave you with that. Obviously, happy to take any questions, and I believe we also have a panel discussion at the end of these presentations. So I look forward to those as well. But that's it from me for now. Thank you very much.